Rush Hour 3 is an American action comedy film and the third installment in the Rush Hour franchise. The film was produced by New Line Cinema in association with Roger Birnbaum Productions and Arthur Sarkisian Productions. It was distributed by New Line Cinema in North America and Warner Bros. Pictures internationally. The film was directed by Brett Ratner, the same director who helmed the first two Rush Hour films. Ratner, born in Miami, Florida, is a Hollywood filmmaker known for his ability to blend high-energy action with sharp comedy. His consistent involvement in the franchise gave Rush Hour 3 a familiar, polished tone that fans of the series had come to expect. The screenplay was written by Jeff Nathanson, who also wrote Rush Hour 2. The film was produced by Roger Birnbaum, Jay Stern, Andrew Z. Davis, and Arthur Sarkisian. The original music score was composed by Lalo Schifrin, the legendary Argentine-American composer who had scored all three films in the franchise. Rush Hour 3 was primarily filmed on location in Paris, France, which gave the film a distinctly European backdrop, a significant departure from the Los Angeles and Hong Kong settings of the previous two films. Production also took place in Los Angeles for certain opening sequences. The use of iconic Parisian landmarks, including the Eiffel Tower, added a grand visual scale to the final act of the film and gave audiences something fresh and visually spectacular. This was a major Hollywood production with a budget of approximately $140 million, making it one of the more expensive comedies produced at that time. It is important to understand that the Rush Hour franchise, by the time the third film arrived, had already generated over $500 million at the global box office from its first two entries, making the production of a third film a commercially logical and highly anticipated move from New Line Cinema. The story of Rush Hour 3 begins in Los Angeles, where we are reintroduced to the two central characters, Detective Inspector Lee of the Hong Kong Police, played by Jackie Chan, and Detective James Carter of the Los Angeles Police Department, played by Chris Tucker. At the start of the film, Carter is now working as a traffic cop, having been reassigned after some reckless behavior, while Lee is still serving as the personal bodyguard of Chinese Ambassador Solon Han. The central conflict begins at the World Criminal Court, where Ambassador Han is about to deliver crucial testimony that would expose the leadership of a powerful Chinese criminal organization known as the Triads. Before Han can testify, he is shot by a sniper and critically wounded. Lee witnesses the attack and pursues the shooter. In a dramatic confrontation, Lee discovers that the sniper is none other than Kenji, a man who was raised alongside Lee as a foster brother in an orphanage in China. This personal connection between Lee and the film's antagonist forms one of the emotional cores of the story, exploring themes of loyalty, brotherhood, and betrayal. Carter, who happens to be nearby directing traffic, witnesses the chaos and immediately joins Lee in the investigation. The two friends, now reunited, follow the trail of evidence to Paris, France, where the Triads have deep connections and where a mysterious list known as the Shyishin is believed to be hidden. The Shyishin is a secret list containing the names of the highest-ranking members of the Triad organization, intelligence so dangerous that multiple powerful criminal figures are willing to kill to protect it. Upon arriving in Paris, Lee and Carter are met with a city full of complications. They encounter a French taxi driver named George, played by Yvonne Adel, who initially wants nothing to do with them but is eventually drawn into their mission through a series of chaotic and comedic circumstances. The trio navigates the streets of Paris, dealing with crooked local authorities, Triad assassins, and the cultural confusion that arises from two Americans, one of whom barely speaks French, trying to operate in a foreign city. The investigation eventually leads them to a beautiful showgirl named Genevieve, played by Noémie Lenoir, who works at the Crazy Horse Cabaret in Paris, and who holds a critical connection to the Shyishin list. As the plot thickens, they also come into contact with Varden Reynard, a high-ranking French diplomat played by the legendary Swedish actor Max von Sydow, who appears to be helping the authorities but whose true allegiances are far more sinister. The film builds to an explosive climax set on and around the Eiffel Tower, one of the most recognizable structures in the world, where Lee must confront Kenji in a final showdown. The confrontation is both physically intense and emotionally charged, as Lee refuses to believe that his foster brother is entirely beyond redemption. The finale blends the franchise's trademark action choreography, particularly Jackie Chan's extraordinary martial arts and stunt work, with genuine emotional stakes that give the conclusion more weight than a typical action comedy. Throughout the film, the dynamic between Lee and Carter continues to be the heart of the story. Their friendship, built over 2 previous films, is tested by disagreements and different approaches, but ultimately their bond is what carries them through every obstacle. The humor arising from their contrasting personalities, Lee's disciplined, focused professionalism against Carter's loud, improvised, streetwise charisma, remains the engine of the franchise's appeal, and Rush Hour 3 leans fully into that chemistry. Now let us talk about the people who brought this film to life. Rush Hour 3 features a remarkable ensemble cast that includes both returning franchise veterans and notable new additions. Jackie Chan, a martial artist and actor of extraordinary talent and global recognition, had built the character of Lee across the entire franchise into one of his most beloved English-language roles. His physical performance in Rush Hour 3, at 53 years old at the time of filming, continues to be nothing short of astonishing. Chris Tucker, who had largely stepped away from Hollywood between Rush Hour 2 in 2001 and this film in 2007, returned as the irreplaceable Detective Carter. Tucker's comedic timing and his real-world chemistry with Jackie Chan remain the defining element of what makes the Rush Hour series work as well as it does. The casting of Max von Sydow as the villain Varden Reynard was a particularly strong choice. Von Sydow, a Swedish actor with one of the most distinguished careers in cinema history, spanning films like The Exorcist, The Seventh Seal, and countless other landmark productions, brought genuine menace and screen presence to a role that could easily have been one-dimensional. Hiroyuki Sanada, the acclaimed Japanese actor known for his work in both Japanese cinema and Hollywood productions, brought considerable depth and physicality to the role of Kenji. His martial arts background made his action sequences with Jackie Chan feel authentic and technically impressive. Roman Polanski, the acclaimed film director, made a memorable cameo appearance as Detective Revy, a French police officer who interrogates Carter and Lee. It is a brief but genuinely funny sequence that plays on his real-world persona in an unexpected way. Release date and box office. Rush Hour 3 had its wide theatrical release on August 10, 2007 in the United States. Here are the key production and commercial details of the film. Release date August 10, 2007, USA wide release. Production budget approximately $140 million USD. Worldwide box office approximately $255 million USD. Opening weekend approximately $49.1 million USD. Distributor, USA, New Line Cinema Distributor. International, Warner Bros. Pictures. Director Brett Ratner. Screenplay Jeff Nathanson. Music score Lalo Schifrin. Filming locations Paris, France and Los Angeles, USA. Runtime approximately 90 minutes. MPAA rating PG-13. The film opened at number 1 at the North American box office in its opening weekend, which was a strong commercial showing. However, compared to the franchise's previous entries and the size of the production budget, the film was considered a modest commercial performer rather than a blockbuster hit. Critics were generally mixed in their assessments, praising the performances of Chan and Tucker while noting that the screenplay did not reach the heights of the first 2 films. Despite the mixed reviews, The film performed solidly in international markets, particularly in Asia, where Jackie Chan's stardom drove strong ticket sales. The global total of around $255 million against a $140 million budget made the film profitable for New Line Cinema, though not the runaway success the studio had hoped for. The official theatrical trailer for Rush Hour 3 was released several months before the film's August 2007 premiere and generated significant excitement among fans of the franchise. The trailer opens with the familiar banter and chemistry between Lee and Carter, immediately reminding audiences what they loved about the first two films. It showcases the Paris setting extensively, with footage of the Eiffel Tower, Parisian streets, and European chase sequences that signaled a more globe-trotting adventure compared to the primarily US-set storyline of the first film. The trailer highlights several of the film's major action set pieces, including high-speed car chases through Paris, hand-to-hand combat sequences featuring Jackie Chan's signature acrobatic style, and brief glimpses of the climactic Eiffel Tower confrontation. It also features a number of comedic moments, particularly Chris Tucker's scenes, that capture the comedic tone of the franchise. The music used in the promotional material helped position the film as a fun, high-energy summer blockbuster aimed at a broad audience. You can find the official Rush Hour 3 trailer on YouTube by simply searching Rush Hour 3 Official Trailer 2007. The trailer perfectly encapsulates the spirit of the film and remains a great way to get a taste of what the movie delivers before watching the full feature. Legacy and final thoughts. Rush Hour 3 holds a complicated but important place in cinema history. As the final entry in the Rush Hour franchise, it served as the closing chapter for one of the most commercially successful buddy cop comedy series ever made. The franchise as a whole grossed over $840 million worldwide across its three films, a remarkable achievement that cemented Jackie Chan's status as one of Hollywood's biggest action stars of the late 1990s and 2000s. The chemistry between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker is genuinely irreplaceable. You can study it all you like and still not be able to explain exactly why it works as well as it does. It is part cultural, part comedic timing, part genuine off-screen friendship, and it remains one of the great pairings in buddy comedy history. Rush Hour 3, whatever its flaws, delivers on that central promise. Over the years, discussions about a potential Rush Hour 4 have surfaced multiple times, with both Chan and Tucker expressing occasional interest in returning, but as of the time of this video, no confirmed fourth film has entered production. For now, Rush Hour 3 remains the final word in this beloved franchise, and for fans who grew up watching these films, that is both a bittersweet and satisfying note to end on. The complete story where it all begins, Los Angeles, the streets, and a changed world. The story of Rush Hour 3 opens not with a bang but with something far more humbling. Detective James Carter, once a brash, self-assured Los Angeles Police Department officer who had helped crack two of the most dangerous criminal conspiracies in recent history, is now standing in the middle of a busy intersection in downtown Los Angeles directing traffic. He is wearing a traffic officer's uniform, waving cars through crosswalks, blowing his whistle, and doing the kind of low-level municipal work that is about as far removed from international crime fighting as a person can get. For anyone who followed Carter through the first two Rush Hour films, this image is both comedic and quietly sad, a reminder that his reckless, rule-breaking approach to police work has finally caught up with him in a very unglamorous way. Carter, however, has not lost an ounce of his personality. Even standing at a traffic corner in a city that largely ignores him, he performs his job with theatrical energy, dancing, spinning, and narrating his own movements as though he is the star of a show that no one has shown up to watch. He has always been a man who needs an audience, and even without one, he manufactures his own enthusiasm. It is a perfectly constructed opening scene that reestablishes his character immediately for both new viewers and longtime fans of the franchise. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a very different kind of scene is unfolding. Detective Inspector Lee of the Hong Kong Police has not been directing traffic. In the years since the events of Rush Hour 2, Lee has been stationed in Los Angeles serving as the personal bodyguard and security detail for Ambassador Solon Han, the powerful and respected Chinese diplomat who first appeared in the original Rush Hour film. Ambassador Han is preparing to do something extraordinarily dangerous. He is about to testify before the World Criminal Court, a tribunal convened to investigate and prosecute the leadership of the Triads, one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations operating across East Asia and the wider world. The testimony Ambassador Han is about to give is significant enough that it could dismantle the upper echelons of Triad leadership, expose corruption across multiple governments, and send some of the most dangerous and untouchable criminals on the planet to prison. Naturally, the Triads have no intention of allowing this testimony to take place. The atmosphere surrounding the courthouse is tense. Security is heavy. Lee moves through the crowds with his eyes always scanning, always alert, always working. The assassination attempt. A shot that changes everything as Ambassador Han makes his way toward the courthouse to deliver his historic testimony. A sniper takes up position at a distance with a clear line of sight. In a sudden, violent moment that cuts through the otherwise controlled and formal setting, a shot rings out. Ambassador Han is struck and collapses. The bullet wounds him critically but does not kill him. Chaos erupts around the scene. Security personnel scramble, bystanders panic, and the carefully organized proceedings of an international tribunal dissolve into confusion and alarm. Lee, standing close to the ambassador at the moment of the shooting, reacts with the speed and precision that has always defined him. He scans the environment, traces the trajectory of the shot, and identifies the building from which it was fired. Without hesitation, he sprints toward the source of the shot, moving through crowds and obstacles with the kind of focused determination that separates him from virtually every other law enforcement officer in the city. Carter, still at his traffic post not far from the courthouse, hears the commotion and sees the chaos unfolding. Despite being on traffic duty and having absolutely no official jurisdiction over this incident, Carter does what Carter always does. He abandons his post and charges toward the action. There is something genuinely touching about this impulse in Carter's character. Despite his ego and his bluster, when things get serious, his instincts are those of a good man who runs toward danger rather than away from it. Lee reaches the building where the sniper was positioned and moves up through the floors at speed, eventually coming face to face with the shooter on a rooftop or upper-level vantage point. What happens next is one of the most emotionally charged moments in the entire Rush Hour franchise. Lee looks at the man standing before him, the assassin who just shot down Ambassador Han, and he recognizes him. The shooter is Kenji, a man who was raised alongside Lee in the same orphanage in China. They share a history that goes deeper than friendship. They are, in every meaningful sense, brothers. The confrontation between Lee and Kenji in this moment is tense and deeply conflicted. Lee cannot simply attack him or arrest him as he would a stranger. There is history between them, pain, loyalty, and a fundamental question hanging in the air about how two boys raised in the same place, by the same people, with presumably the same values, ended up on opposite sides of the law. Kenji, for his part, is cold and focused. He is no longer the boy Lee knew. He has become something harder and more dangerous, shaped by choices and allegiances that Lee cannot fully understand in this moment. Before Lee can fully process what is happening, Kenji escapes. He vanishes into the city, leaving Lee standing with the weight of what he has just discovered pressing down on him. Carter arrives shortly after, having missed the direct confrontation, and finds Lee visibly shaken in a way that is unusual for the disciplined, composed inspector. Lee tells Carter what he has just seen. Carter, to his credit, does not joke about it. He can see the weight of it on his partner and friend, and for a brief moment the film allows the two of them to simply stand together in the reality of what has just happened, before the machinery of the investigation begins to grind forward again. Following the trail, the decision to go to Paris, the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt, is managed and Ambassador Han is taken to a hospital. The investigation begins to piece together what actually happened and, more importantly, why. The conclusion that emerges points towards something known as the Shyishin. This is not a person but a document, a list, the most dangerous list in the world of organized crime. The Shyishin contains the true identities of the highest-ranking and most secretive leaders of the Triad criminal organization, the people who sit at the top of a global criminal empire, and who have managed to remain completely anonymous and untouchable by operating through layers of intermediaries, front companies, and criminal proxies. The existence of such a list is extraordinary. These are individuals who have never been photographed by law enforcement, never been named in court proceedings, never been publicly identified in any way. The Shyishin represents the one document that could bring all of them down simultaneously, strip away their anonymity, and deliver them to justice. It is precisely because of this power that Ambassador Han was targeted. His testimony was connected to information about the Shyishin, and the Triads could not allow that information to reach the court. The investigation reveals that the trail of the Shyishin leads to Paris, France. This is where critical intelligence is believed to be held. This is where Kenji and his Triad connections are operating. This is where the key to the entire conspiracy can be found. Lee, driven by the personal connection to Kenji as much as by his professional duty, is determined to go. Carter, who under normal circumstances would have no authority or reason to be involved in any of this given that he is currently assigned to traffic duty in Los Angeles, decides without hesitation that he is going with Lee. The decision to go to Paris sets the entire middle and final acts of the film in motion. It is also a beautifully simple franchise move, taking two characters who are deeply associated with the streets of Los Angeles and the energy of American urban life and dropping them into one of the most distinctly and recognizably non-American cities in the world. Paris is everything Los Angeles is not: ancient, formal, elegant, culturally precise, and deeply indifferent to the particular brand of loud American confidence that Carter embodies. The contrast is not just comedic, it is the engine of the film's second act. Arrival in Paris, culture clash, taxi rides, and new alliances. Lee and Carter arrive in Paris, and the culture shock is immediate, particularly for Carter. Paris operates by different rules than Los Angeles. The language is different, the social codes are different, the way people interact with authority is different, and the general pace and rhythm of daily life feels entirely foreign to Carter's very American sensibilities. Carter's attempts to communicate with Parisian locals are a source of significant comedic material throughout this section of the film. His complete inability to speak French, combined with his absolute unwillingness to acknowledge this as a problem, leads to a series of misunderstandings and confrontations that are played entirely for laughs and largely succeed. It is not long after their arrival that Lee and Carter encounter George, a French taxi driver who will become one of the more memorable supporting characters in the film. George is played by Yvonne Adel, a French-Israeli actor, and the character is introduced as an ordinary working man who simply wants to drive his taxi, earn his fare, and go home in one piece. From the moment Lee and Carter climb into his cab, George's life is turned upside down. George initially speaks to them in rapid French, not realizing that Carter understands essentially none of what he is saying. When Carter attempts to respond in what he believes is passable French, the results are catastrophic. George becomes increasingly alarmed as he begins to understand that these two men are not ordinary tourists. They are law enforcement officers from another country who are pursuing armed and extremely dangerous criminals through the streets of Paris. For George, a man with no particular desire for adventure, this is horrifying. However, the film handles George's reluctant involvement with some care. Rather than simply making him a purely comedic background figure, the script gives him moments where his fundamental decency and unexpected courage emerge. He does not want to be involved, and his protests are consistent and genuine, but at critical moments he chooses to stay and help rather than abandon the people who, despite causing chaos in his life, are clearly trying to do the right thing. George becomes, in his own modest and frequently terrified way, a genuine ally. As the three of them begin to navigate Paris together, the investigation starts to develop. Lee uses his contacts and his knowledge of triad operations to identify potential leads, while Carter works on gathering information through his own more chaotic and instinct-driven methods. Paris itself functions almost as a character in this section of the film. The streets, the architecture, the landmarks, and the distinctive atmosphere of the city are all woven into the action and comedy in ways that give the film a visual and tonal identity distinctly its own within the franchise. Genevieve and the Crazy Horse. The heart of the mystery. The investigation leads Lee and Carter to the Crazy Horse, one of Paris's most famous and historically significant cabaret venues. The Crazy Horse has been a landmark of Parisian nightlife for decades, known for its theatrical, artistic, and provocative performances. It is an unexpected but perfectly fitting location for a key plot development in a film that is continually drawing on the visual richness of Paris as its backdrop. At the Crazy Horse, they encounter Genevieve, a strikingly beautiful showgirl who works as a performer at the venue. Genevieve is played by Noémie Lenoir, a French model and actress, and her character occupies an important position in the story's middle section. Genevieve is not simply a romantic interest or a decorative figure. She is a woman with genuine connections to the Shyishin and to the Triad network operating in Paris, though the precise nature of those connections is something the film reveals gradually. Carter is immediately and completely captivated by Genevieve, which leads to a number of comedic moments as he attempts to impress and charm her with varying degrees of success. Lee, characteristically, focuses on what she knows and what information she might be able to provide rather than on how she looks. The contrast between Carter's romantic distraction and Lee's professional focus is a recurring dynamic in the film and plays out particularly clearly in these scenes. As Genevieve becomes more involved in the story, it becomes clear that she is in genuine danger. The Triads are aware of her connections to the Shyishin and they are willing to use violence to either retrieve what she knows or eliminate her entirely. This puts Lee and Carter in the position of not only investigating the conspiracy but actively protecting her, which adds an additional layer of urgency and personal stakes to the second act of the film. The scenes involving Genevieve also serve to deepen the story's exploration of the Shyishin itself. Through conversations with her and through the intelligence they gather in Paris, Lee and Carter begin to understand the true scope of what they are dealing with. The list is not just a document, it is a key that unlocks an entire hidden world of criminal power that has been operating invisibly for years. The people named on the Shyishin are not minor figures. They are the architects of an empire built on violence, exploitation, and the corruption of legitimate institutions across multiple countries. Varden Reynard, the villain behind the curtain as the investigation deepens, a man named Varden Reynard enters the picture. Reynard is played by Max von Sydow, the legendary Swedish actor whose career spans some of the greatest films of the 20th century, and his presence in the film brings a weight and gravity that elevates every scene he is in. Reynard presents himself as a powerful French official, a man of standing and apparent authority within Parisian law enforcement and diplomatic circles. On the surface, Reynard appears to be an ally, someone with resources, connections, and access who can assist Lee and Carter in navigating the French bureaucratic and law enforcement landscape. He has access to information, to places, and to people that Lee and Carter would otherwise struggle to reach. He presents himself as cooperative and concerned, seemingly as invested in the resolution of the triad threat as the protagonists themselves. However, as the film progresses, the audience gradually begins to understand that Reynard is not what he appears to be. His true loyalties are not to justice or to the dismantling of the triad network. He is deeply and corruptly entangled with the very organization he pretends to be working against. Reynard is, in fact, one of the key facilitators of the triad's operations in Europe, and his apparent cooperation with Lee and Carter is a calculated strategy to monitor the investigation, control what information they can access, and ultimately manipulate the outcome in the triad's favor. Max von Sydow brings tremendous subtlety to this role. He plays Reynard as a man of absolute composure, a person who has spent so many years operating in the overlap between legitimate power and criminal enterprise that the deception has become completely natural to him. He is never cartoonishly villainous. He is controlled, intelligent, and deeply menacing precisely because he does not feel the need to perform menace. The revelation of his true nature lands with significant impact because von Sydow has played the ambiguity so carefully throughout. Reynard's presence also connects thematically to one of the film's broader concerns: the idea that the most dangerous corruption is not the kind that operates openly in dark alleys and underground hideouts, but the kind that wears a suit, speaks in a measured tone, and operates in the offices and meeting rooms of legitimate power. The triads in Rush Hour 3 are not just street criminals. They are a network that has penetrated institutions, bought influence, and placed their people inside the very structures meant to oppose them. Kenji, a brotherhood broken, a bond that will not die. Throughout the Paris section of the film, the shadow of Kenji falls over everything Lee does. Kenji, played with powerful restraint by Hiroyuki Sanada, is the emotional center of the film's most serious dramatic thread. He is not a faceless villain. He is Lee's foster brother, a man who grew up beside him, who shared meals and hardship and the particular loneliness of children without parents in an orphanage in China. The bond between them is real, forged in circumstances that neither of them chose. What separates them is not character. Both men are disciplined, capable, deeply committed to their sense of purpose. What separates them is the path they chose when they were old enough to make choices. Lee chose law. He chose duty. He chose to place himself in service of order and protection. Kenji chose power. He chose the triads, an organization that offered structure, belonging, and advancement to those willing to commit themselves to it completely, regardless of the cost to others. Kenji has risen through the triad hierarchy to become a highly skilled and trusted operative. His assignment to assassinate Ambassador Han was not the act of a low-level soldier. It was the act of someone whose abilities and loyalty have been tested and proven. And yet, in his encounters with Lee throughout the Paris section of the film, there are moments, small, carefully handled, where something else shows through. Not regret, exactly, but an awareness of what the path he chose has cost him. A recognition, buried under years of hardened commitment, that the person standing across from him is someone he once loved as a brother. Lee, for his part, refuses to give up on the possibility that Kenji can be reached. This is not naivety on Lee's part. It is a deeply held conviction that the person Kenji was, the boy he knew, is still somewhere inside the man who has become an assassin. This conviction drives Lee's approach to every encounter with Kenji and ultimately shapes the film's climax in ways that distinguish Rush Hour 3 from a purely action-driven thriller. Kenji operates throughout the Paris section of the film as both antagonist and tragic figure simultaneously. He is pursuing the same objective as the triads, recovering the Shyishin and eliminating anyone who might use it against the organization. He is willing to use violence to achieve this. And yet there is always the sense that his relationship with Lee is the one thing in his world that the hardening process of his criminal career has not been able to entirely extinguish. Action through the streets of Paris, chases, combat, and chaos woven throughout the investigation and the character development is a series of action sequences that are staged against the backdrop of Paris with considerable visual imagination. The streets of Paris, narrow cobblestone lanes, grand boulevards, famous squares and bridges, provide a strikingly different environment for the franchise's action choreography compared to the Los Angeles and Hong Kong settings of the previous films. Jackie Chan's fight choreography in Rush Hour 3 continues to demonstrate the extraordinary physical creativity that has defined his career. Even at an age when most action stars would be relying almost entirely on stunt doubles, Chan finds ways to use his body, his environment, and the objects around him in combat in ways that are simultaneously inventive and funny. His fighting style has always contained an element of comedy, the improvised use of everyday objects, the near miss that leaves the audience catching their breath and laughing at the same time. And the Parisian setting gives this approach new material to work with. Carter's contribution to the action sequences is characteristically different from Lee's. Where Lee fights with technical precision and physical mastery, Carter fights with desperation, luck, and a kind of aggressive confidence that makes up for its lack of technique with sheer refusal to accept defeat. The contrast between their combat styles has always been one of the franchise's most reliable sources of both comedy and action tension, and Rush Hour 3 makes good use of it throughout these Paris sequences. George the taxi driver contributes to several of these action sequences in ways that draw on his knowledge of Paris's streets and his small but fast vehicle. His taxi becomes something of a mobile base of operations for the trio, and the sequences involving high-speed drives through Parisian streets, weaving past landmarks, squeezing through impossibly narrow gaps, navigating the famously chaotic traffic of a European city, add a kinetic energy to the action that is distinct from anything in the previous Rush Hour films. There is also a memorable sequence involving a very large adversary, Jasper, played by Sun Ming Ming, who at over 7 feet tall presents a physical challenge that even Lee's martial arts skills struggle to overcome in a straightforward confrontation. This sequence plays on the franchise's tradition of finding inventive ways for Jackie Chan's smaller frame to deal with physically overwhelming opponents, and it is one of the more purely entertaining set pieces in the film. Truths revealed, allies, betrayals, and the Shyishin exposed as the film moves toward its third act. The various threads of the investigation begin to converge. The true nature of Reynard's involvement is exposed, and Lee and Carter are forced to navigate a situation in which the person who was supposedly helping them has been working against them all along. This revelation reframes events from earlier in the film and raises the stakes considerably. If Reynard has been monitoring and manipulating the investigation, then certain pieces of intelligence they believed they had secured may be compromised, and certain people they believed were safe may be in greater danger than they realized. The Shyishin itself comes into sharper focus in this section of the film. The document is not something that can simply be seized and handed to a court. It is a piece of intelligence surrounded by danger, connected to people with enormous resources and absolute willingness to use violence, and it sits at the center of a web of criminal and institutional corruption that extends far beyond what Lee and Carter initially understood when they boarded their flight to Paris. Genevieve's role in protecting this intelligence becomes clear, and the danger she faces becomes more immediate and concrete. The film handles this part of the story with a reasonable amount of care, making sure that Genevieve is not simply a passive figure in need of rescue but someone who has made active choices, difficult, courageous choices, to hold on to information that she knows could get her killed. Carter's feelings for Genevieve, which have been played largely for comedy throughout the film, take on a slightly more sincere quality in these scenes. Carter is not a character the franchise asks us to take entirely seriously in emotional terms, but Rush Hour 3 does allow him a moment or two of genuine feeling that grounds his motivations beyond the purely comedic. He cares about her, and that caring is real even if it is expressed through his characteristically exaggerated and self-referential personality. By the time the film reaches its final act, all the major pieces are in place. Reynard's corruption has been exposed. Kenji's location is known. The Shyishin is at the center of the endgame. And the location where everything will be resolved has been established, not in a dark basement or a criminal warehouse but at one of the most recognizable and iconic structures on the face of the earth, the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower, the final confrontation, the climax of Rush Hour 3 takes place on and around the Eiffel Tower, and it is a finale that knows exactly what it is trying to do. The choice of the Eiffel Tower as the setting for the final confrontation is not subtle. It is one of the most famous structures in the world, an instantly recognizable symbol of Paris and of France, and staging the film's climactic action sequence that gives the ending a visual grandeur and a sense of occasion that matches the scope of everything the story has been building toward: the ascent of the Eiffel Tower, both literally in terms of the physical climbing involved in the action sequences, and metaphorically in terms of the escalating stakes, is handled with considerable visual ambition. The tower's distinctive iron lattice structure, its multiple levels, its outdoor platforms and staircases, all become elements in the staging of the fight and chase sequences that take place within and upon it. Jackie Chan, characteristically, makes use of the architecture in ways that feel both dangerous and inventive, using the structural elements of the tower as aids, obstacles, and weapons in equal measure. The key confrontation of the finale is between Lee and Kenji. This is the moment the film has been building towards since the rooftop scene in Los Angeles. The moment when the two foster brothers who ended up on opposite sides of everything must face each other without any possibility of running away or postponing the reckoning. Lee has been holding on to the hope that Kenji can be saved, that the bond of brotherhood forged in their shared childhood is strong enough to cut through the years of criminal conditioning and loyalty to the triads. Kenji, for his part, has been trying to convince himself that Lee is simply an obstacle, a professional problem to be dealt with rather than a brother to be protected. Their fight at the top of the Eiffel Tower is both physically spectacular and emotionally charged. Hiroyuki Sanada and Jackie Chan are both accomplished martial artists, and the choreography between them is technically impressive. But what gives the fight its real weight is the emotional subtext underneath every exchange. These are not two strangers trying to kill each other. They are two people who share a history, and every movement and moment in their confrontation carries that history with it. The resolution of the Lee and Kenji confrontation is handled with more emotional complexity than most action films of this type would attempt. Without giving away every detail, the outcome reflects the film's consistent insistence, through Lee's attitude throughout the entire story, that people are more than the choices they have made, and that the love between people who were once genuinely close to each other does not simply disappear when their paths diverge into darkness. It is a moment that earns genuine emotion, and it is one of the most memorable sequences in the entire Rush Hour franchise. Carter, naturally, has his own role to play in the finale, dealing with Reynard, protecting Genevieve, and contributing to the resolution of the larger criminal conspiracy in the way that only Carter can, which is to say loudly, chaotically, and with the kind of improvised confidence that somehow always manages to produce results despite every indication that it should not. The contrast between Lee's climactic emotional confrontation with Kenji and Carter's more comedic but still genuinely contributing role in the finale is the perfect encapsulation of what the franchise has always done best: holding comedy and genuine feeling in the same space at the same time. Aftermath and resolution: the end of the road with the Triad's plan dismantled, Reynard's corruption exposed, and the Shyishin secured. The film moves into its resolution. The danger has passed. Paris, which has served as the site of so much chaos over the course of the story, returns to its customary elegance and indifference, as though a pair of American law enforcement officers and their unwilling French taxi driver did not just tear through its streets in pursuit of international criminals. Ambassador Han, recovering from his wounds, is safe. The testimony he was meant to deliver, the testimony that triggered this entire chain of events, can now be considered in a new light, with the intelligence gathered through Lee and Carter's Paris investigation providing additional support for the prosecution of Triad leadership. The mission, as unplanned and chaotic as it was, achieved something real. Carter and Lee share the kind of ending that the franchise has always given them. A moment that is simultaneously funny and genuinely warm, that reflects the depth of their friendship without becoming sentimental about it. Their bond, forged across 3 films and multiple near-death experiences, has never been the kind that is expressed through long speeches or emotional declarations. It is expressed through the rhythm of their interactions, the way they talk to each other, the ease and the friction and the absolute certainty that they will always show up for each other no matter what. George the taxi driver gets his own quiet moment of resolution, a character who wanted nothing more than to get back to his ordinary life and who ends up having been part of something much larger than himself, carrying it with him in the particular way that ordinary people carry extraordinary experiences. And Carter, perhaps most satisfying of all, ends the film still very much Carter, unchanged in the fundamental ways, incapable of being humbled for long, already composing in his head the version of these events that he will tell other people, a version in which he is even more central and more heroic than the reality. It is a perfect note to end on for a character who has always been exactly who he is, without apology and without alteration, and who the audience loves for precisely that reason. Rush Hour 3 closes on Paris, still standing, still beautiful, still entirely indifferent to the chaos that just passed through it, and with Lee and Carter moving forward, friendship intact, adventures presumably still ahead, even if this particular chapter of their story has now reached its end. The complete story of Rush Hour 3 is ready above, broken into 11 detailed chapters that cover the entire film from beginning to end. Here is what each chapter covers. The story starts with Carter's humbling traffic duty assignment and Ambassador Han's attempted assassination, then moves through the discovery of Kenji's identity as Lee's foster brother, the decision to travel to Paris, the culture clash comedy upon arrival, the introduction of George the taxi driver, the crazy horse cabaret and Genevieve's role in the mystery, the exposure of Reynard as the corrupt villain behind everything, the emotional thread of Lee and Kenji's broken brotherhood, the Paris street action sequences, the convergence of all plot threads, the grand Eiffel Tower climax, and finally the emotional and comedic resolution. Jackie Chan was born Chan Kong Sang on April 7, 1954, in Victoria Peak, British Hong Kong. His birth came at a particularly turbulent time in China's history. The country was only a few years removed from the Communist Revolution of 1949, and Hong Kong itself was a British colonial territory experiencing significant social and economic pressures. His parents, Charles and Lily Chan, were working-class people who had fled mainland China during the Civil War and who found themselves struggling to make ends meet in the competitive and crowded environment of colonial Hong Kong. His father worked as a cook for the American consulate in Hong Kong, and his mother worked as a housekeeper. The family's financial situation was precarious enough that shortly after Jackie's birth, his parents seriously considered giving him up for adoption to a British doctor named Dr. Charles Fong who wanted to adopt him. His parents eventually declined, but the fact that such a decision was even on the table speaks to the economic difficulties the family faced during Jackie's earliest years. As a young child, Jackie Chan was by all accounts an extraordinarily energetic, difficult, and physical child, one who could not sit still and who seemed almost incapable of moving through the world without climbing on, jumping off, or physically engaging with everything around him. He struggled significantly in school, where academic work held no interest for him and where the formal, disciplined environment of a classroom was about as poorly suited to his temperament as any environment could be. When Jackie was 7 years old, his father was offered a job in Canberra, Australia, working for the American embassy there. Rather than uproot the young Jackie entirely, his parents made the remarkable decision to enroll him in the China Drama Academy in Hong Kong, a school run by Master Yu Jimuan, a strict and demanding opera master who trained children in the traditional art forms of the Peking opera, including acrobatics, martial arts, singing, and performance. Jackie's parents signed a contract giving the school essentially complete authority over Jackie's upbringing and training for the next decade. Training at the China Drama Academy. The China Drama Academy was not a school in any comfortable, modern sense of the word. It was an institution rooted in old traditions of apprenticeship that were extraordinarily demanding, physically painful, and psychologically challenging by any contemporary standard. The students, children ranging from very young ages to their mid-teens, trained for up to 19 hours a day, sleeping on hard floors, eating basic food, and enduring physical discipline that would be considered abusive by modern standards. Master Yu Jimuan believed that excellence could only be produced through relentless repetition, physical hardship, and the complete subordination of the individual's comfort to the demands of the training. For Jackie Chan, who arrived at the school at age 7 with enormous energy but limited discipline, the academy was a transformative experience of profound difficulty. The training broke him down physically and psychologically, and then rebuilt him as something extraordinary. He learned acrobatics to a level of mastery that would define his physical capabilities for the rest of his career. He developed the flexibility, strength, balance, and spatial awareness that would later allow him to perform stunts that most trained stunt professionals would refuse to attempt. He learned martial arts, not as a sport or as self-defense, but as performance, as drama, as a form of storytelling through the body. During his years at the academy, Jackie became part of a performance troupe known as the Seven Little Fortunes, a group of the school's most talented students who performed publicly and were the pride of Master Yu's institution. Among the Seven Little Fortunes were individuals who would later go on to their own remarkable careers in Hong Kong cinema, including Sammo Hung and Yuan Biao, both of whom became major figures in the Hong Kong martial arts film industry and who maintained close personal and professional friendships with Jackie Chan throughout their lives. By the time Jackie finished his training at the academy in his mid-teens, he was a fully formed physical performer, a young man whose body was capable of things that very few people in the world could match. He had sacrificed a conventional education, a conventional childhood, and the typical developmental experiences of a young person to achieve this capability. Whether that trade-off was worth it is something Jackie Chan has reflected on at various points in his career, with typically complex and honest answers. Early film career in Hong Kong. Jackie Chan's entry into the Hong Kong film industry came gradually and through the typical route of a young physical performer, as a stuntman. In the early 1970s, he began working in minor roles and as a stunt performer in Hong Kong productions, often doing extremely dangerous work for very little pay and almost no recognition. He appeared in small roles in several Bruce Lee films, including Fist of Fury and Enter the Dragon, in the capacity of a minor actor and stuntman. These early Bruce Lee connections are a consistent part of Chan's biography, and they speak to how thoroughly Hong Kong's martial arts film community overlapped during this period. After Bruce Lee's sudden and shocking death in 1973, the Hong Kong film industry went through a period of searching for the next great martial arts star who could fill the enormous commercial void that Lee had left. Several studios and producers attempted to market various performers as successors to Lee. Some tried to imitate Lee's style directly, some tried to develop adjacent approaches. Jackie Chan was among the young performers who were pushed through this process, appearing in films that attempted to position him as a Bruce Lee-type figure. These films were not successful, and for a period in the mid-1970s, Chan's career appeared to be going nowhere in particular. The breakthrough came when Chan and the people around him recognized that trying to be Bruce Lee was exactly the wrong approach. Lee's style was defined by intensity, precision, and a kind of almost supernatural physical perfection, beautiful to watch but not especially funny or accessible. Jackie Chan's natural performance instincts were completely different. He was funny. He was physical in a way that invited laughter as much as admiration. His body communicated vulnerability as well as capability, which meant that audiences could laugh with him as well as cheer for him. When Chan and director Yuen Woo-ping began leaning into this comedic dimension, producing films like Snake in the Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master in 1978, the results were immediately and spectacularly successful. Drunken Master in particular became a phenomenon in Hong Kong and across Asia. The film's combination of extraordinary martial arts choreography, physical comedy, and Chan's charismatic screen presence created a new template for what a martial arts film could be. It was not trying to be Bruce Lee. It was something entirely its own, and audiences responded to it with enormous enthusiasm. Jackie Chan, at 24 years old, was a genuine star. Hollywood, global stardom, and the rush hour era. Chan's first attempts to break into the American market in the early 1980s, through films produced specifically for Western audiences, were largely unsuccessful. American studios and audiences did not know what to make of him at that point, and the films themselves were not representative of what made his Hong Kong work so extraordinary. Chan returned to Hong Kong and continued to make some of the most ambitious and physically spectacular action films ever produced, including the Police Story series, the Project A series, and Armor of God, films that pushed the boundaries of what action cinema could achieve and that established Chan's reputation as one of the most committed and physically daring performers in film history. His Hollywood breakthrough eventually came in 1995 with Rumble in the Bronx, which was released in North America and introduced American audiences to his style in a way that clicked. Then in 1998, Rush Hour arrived and changed everything. Paired with Chris Tucker in a buddy cop comedy that understood exactly how to frame and present Chan's abilities for a mainstream American audience, Rush Hour was a massive commercial success and made Jackie Chan a genuine Hollywood star at an age, 44, when most action performers are winding down. Jackie Chan is also widely known for performing his own stunts, a practice that has resulted in a remarkable and well-documented series of serious injuries over his career, including a skull fracture, multiple broken bones, dislocated joints, and injuries to nearly every part of his body. He has a dedicated section in the credits of many of his films showing stunt injuries and outtakes, a tradition that is itself a kind of honest acknowledgement of what his physical commitment to his craft has actually cost him. Beyond his film work, Jackie Chan has been an active philanthropist for decades, founding the Jackie Chan Charitable Foundation in Hong Kong and contributing to causes related to children's welfare, disaster relief, and education across Asia. He holds honorary degrees from multiple universities and has received numerous lifetime achievement awards from film institutions around the world. He was awarded an Honorary Academy Award in 2016 in recognition of his extraordinary contributions to the film industry. Chris Tucker was born on August 31, 1971, in Atlanta, Georgia, the sixth of 7 children in his family. He grew up in the Jonesboro South neighborhood of Atlanta, a working-class African-American community in the southern part of the city. His father, Norris Tucker, owned a janitorial services business, and his mother, Mary Louise Tucker, worked to help support the family. The Tucker household was a religious one. The family were devout Pentecostal Christians, and faith played a central and ongoing role in Chris Tucker's upbringing, a dimension of his personal life that would continue to be significant throughout his adult years. Growing up in Atlanta in the 1970s and 1980s, Tucker was exposed to a rich cultural environment that shaped his sensibilities as a performer. He was a naturally funny child, someone whose personality was oriented toward making people laugh, toward commanding a room, toward the particular pleasure of an audience responding to something he had done or said. From a very early age, friends and family members recognized that he had an unusual gift for comedy and performance, a natural ease in front of people that most children simply do not possess. Tucker has spoken in various interviews about the performers who influenced him most during his formative years. Eddie Murphy was an enormous figure for him. Murphy's ability to combine sharp observational humor with physical performance and character work, and his particular gift for finding the rhythm and musicality in comedy, were elements that Tucker absorbed and eventually made his own. Richard Pryor was another significant influence, as Pryor's deeply personal and emotionally honest approach to stand-up comedy represented a form of the art that went beyond entertainment into genuine human truth. Tucker's eventual comedic style drew on both of these influences while developing its own distinct characteristics, particularly his extremely high-pitched voice, his extraordinary physical energy, and his ability to build and sustain comedic momentum through sheer force of personality. Stand-up comedy, an early career after finishing high school. Chris Tucker moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in stand-up comedy and acting. The move was a significant leap of faith. Tucker was a young man from Atlanta with no industry connections and no guarantee of success, arriving in a city where thousands of people with similar dreams were competing for limited opportunities. He began performing stand-up comedy on the Los Angeles circuit, working his way through the small clubs and open mic nights that are the traditional proving ground for comedic performers. Tucker's early stand-up work brought him to the attention of Def Comedy Jam, the groundbreaking HBO comedy series that debuted in 1992 and that served as a launching pad for a significant number of important African-American comedic voices during the 1990s. His appearances on Def Comedy Jam brought him to a wider audience and established his reputation as a genuine comedic talent with a distinctive and highly energetic voice. The exposure that Def Comedy Jam provided was crucial to his early career development, connecting him with industry figures and audiences that his club work alone might never have reached. His film debut came in 1994 with House Party 3, a minor role that gave him his first screen experience. The following year, 1995, brought his breakthrough film role in Friday, the hugely popular urban comedy written by and starring Ice Cube. Tucker played Smokey, a fast-talking, weed-smoking best friend character whose comedic energy was a perfect match for Tucker's natural performance style. Friday became a cultural phenomenon in African American communities and beyond, and Tucker's performance in it made him one of the most talked about comedic talents of the year. Rise to Hollywood stardom. After Friday, Tucker's career moved quickly. He appeared in Dead Presidents in 1995 in a supporting role, and then in 1997 he delivered 2 performances that established him firmly in the top tier of Hollywood comic actors. The first was The Fifth Element, Luc Besson's visually spectacular science fiction film, in which Tucker played Ruby Road, a flamboyant, high-energy media personality whose scenes were among the most memorable in a film full of memorable moments. Ruby Road was a bold choice, a character of extreme artifice and physical expressiveness that required Tucker to commit completely and without reservation to a very unusual performance, and he delivered it with extraordinary flair. The same year brought Money Talks, an action comedy in which Tucker starred alongside Charlie Sheen. The film was a commercial success and demonstrated Tucker's ability to carry a Hollywood production as a lead, something that was not a given for comedic performers transitioning from supporting roles and stand-up backgrounds. Then in 1998 came Rush Hour, and everything changed. The pairing of Chris Tucker with Jackie Chan and Brett Ratner's buddy cop comedy was, in retrospect, an almost perfectly calibrated match of performer to role. Tucker's Carter and Chan's Lee were contrasts in almost every dimension: cultural background, approach to authority, communication style, physical presence, comedic register, and the film exploited these contrasts with consistent intelligence and timing. Rush Hour grossed over $244 million worldwide against a $33 million budget, and Chris Tucker became one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood almost overnight. Rush Hour 2 in 2001 was even more successful commercially, grossing over $347 million worldwide and cementing the franchise's place as one of the most valuable comedic action properties in Hollywood. After Rush Hour 2, Tucker largely stepped away from Hollywood for several years, a hiatus that he has attributed to a combination of factors including his personal faith, a desire to be more selective about his work, and his involvement in philanthropic activities. He traveled extensively in Africa and worked on charitable causes, spending time with Nelson Mandela and other African leaders and developing projects related to humanitarian work on the continent. His return for Rush Hour 3 in 2007 was one of the most anticipated comebacks in recent Hollywood memory, and his performance demonstrated that the years away had not diminished the qualities that made his Carter so beloved. Since Rush Hour 3, Tucker has remained selectively active in entertainment, performing stand-up comedy and appearing in occasional film and television projects, while continuing his philanthropic work. Max von Sydow was born Karl Adolf von Sydow on April 10, 1929, in Lund, a university city in the southernmost province of Sweden. His family background was distinguished. His father, Carl Wilhelm von Sydow, was a professor of folklore at Lund University, a scholar of considerable standing in his field, and his mother, Baroness Marta Rapp, came from a Swedish noble family. This background of intellectual and cultural seriousness left a deep impression on von Sydow, instilling in him the rigorous, thoughtful approach to his craft that would define his career across more than 7 decades. Growing up in Lund during the 1930s and into the years of the Second World War, von Sydow was immersed in the cultural and intellectual life that his father's academic position made accessible. Sweden remained neutral during the war, sparing the young von Sydow the direct physical devastation experienced by much of Europe. But the psychological weight of that period, the awareness of what was happening across Europe's borders, was present in Swedish cultural life and certainly shaped the sensibility of artists and intellectuals who came of age during that time. Von Sydow developed an interest in theater from a young age and pursued it with determined seriousness. He studied at the Royal Dramatic Theatre's acting school in Stockholm, one of the most prestigious theatrical training institutions in Scandinavia, and emerged as a classically trained actor with exceptional range, depth, and technical command. Ingmar Bergman and international recognition. The defining relationship of Max von Sydow's early career was his collaboration with Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish filmmaker who is widely regarded as one of the greatest directors in the history of cinema. Bergman was the artistic director of the Malmo City Theatre during the early 1950s, and von Sydow joined his company as a young actor, beginning a professional collaboration that would produce some of the most celebrated films in the history of world cinema. Their first film collaboration was The Seventh Seal in 1957, a work of staggering philosophical ambition that depicted a medieval knight, played by von Sydow, returning from the Crusades and playing a game of chess with death itself as he grapples with questions of faith, mortality, and the meaning of human existence. Von Sydow's performance in The Seventh Seal introduced him to international audiences and established him immediately as an actor of extraordinary gravity and presence. The film became one of the most iconic and discussed works in cinema history, and the image of von Sydow's knight facing death across a chessboard became one of the most reproduced images in the history of film. He continued to work with Bergman on numerous subsequent films, including Wild Strawberries, The Magician, The Virgin Spring, Through a Glass Darkly, Winter Light, and The Silence, among others. This body of work across the late 1950s and through the 1960s established von Sydow as one of the greatest film actors in the world, a performer whose ability to embody moral complexity, existential doubt, spiritual struggle, and human frailty was essentially unmatched in world cinema. Von Sydow's transition to international and Hollywood productions came through his casting in The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1965. In which he played Jesus Christ, a role that required him to bring dignity, compassion, and spiritual authority to one of the most culturally loaded roles in cinema. Whatever one's views on the film itself, von Sydow's physical and psychological presence in the role was undeniable. His role as the tormented father in The Exorcist in 1973 brought him to the attention of the widest possible mainstream American audience. The Exorcist remains one of the most commercially successful and culturally impactful horror films ever made, and von Sydow's performance as the elderly Jesuit priest Father Marin, a man who has encountered the supernatural before and who approaches the climactic confrontation with exhausted determination, was a masterclass in how to anchor an extreme and sensational narrative with genuine human weight. Throughout the decades that followed, von Sydow built one of the most extraordinarily varied filmographies in cinema history. He appeared in blockbusters and art films, in Hollywood productions and European prestige projects, in fantasy films and intimate dramas, always bringing the same fundamental commitment and intelligence to every role regardless of the commercial or artistic context. In his later years he appeared in films like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, for which he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and in the television series Game of Thrones as the Three-Eyed Raven. Max von Sydow passed away on March 8, 2020, at the age of 90, leaving behind a body of work that spans more than 60 years and represents one of the most remarkable acting careers in the history of cinema. Hiroyuki Sanada was born on October 12, 1960, in Tokyo, Japan. His path into the entertainment industry began at a very young age. He started training in martial arts and performance as a child, and by the age of 5 he was already involved in the world of acting. He trained extensively in martial arts, developing proficiency in multiple disciplines including sword fighting techniques associated with the traditional Japanese art of kenjutsu, as well as other martial disciplines. He also trained in acrobatics and stage performance, developing the broad range of physical skills that would make him one of the most versatile and technically accomplished physical actors in Japanese cinema. Sanada joined the Ken Production Theater Company as a young performer, working under the legendary Japanese actor and producer Sonny Chiba, one of the most influential figures in Japanese action cinema and a performer whose own career would eventually extend to Hollywood productions, including Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. Working with Chiba and the Japan Action Club, the performance company associated with him gave Sanada rigorous training in the physical and technical demands of action performance at the highest level. The discipline instilled during these years became the foundation of everything that followed. Japanese film and television career. Sanada built an extraordinary career in Japanese film and television over the course of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. He appeared in numerous samurai dramas and action films that made him one of the most respected and recognizable actors in Japan. His sword fighting skills in particular were considered among the finest possessed by any actor working in Japanese cinema, and period dramas requiring authentic and technically excellent swordsmanship repeatedly sought him out. He was not simply an action performer, however. As his career progressed, he developed into an actor of considerable dramatic range, capable of carrying emotionally complex narratives with the same conviction he brought to physical performance. His work in Japanese cinema earned him recognition at the highest levels of the Japanese film industry, and he became a figure whose reputation transcended the action genre to encompass serious dramatic work. He also brought his theatrical training to bear in stage productions, maintaining a connection to live performance alongside his film and television work that kept his technique sharp and grounded. International career and Hollywood. Sanada's international profile grew significantly when he appeared in the British production of the stage show and subsequent television production of Shogun, and it expanded further through his appearances in international co-productions that brought Japanese actors to wider global audiences. His performance in the acclaimed Japanese film Twilight Samurai in 2002 was particularly celebrated, earning him the Japan Academy Prize for Best Actor, the most prestigious acting award in the Japanese film industry, and bringing renewed international attention to his work. His Hollywood breakthrough came through The Last Samurai in 2003, in which he appeared alongside Tom Cruise in Edward Zwick's historical epic. Sanada played Yujiro, a skilled samurai warrior whose relationship with the Tom Cruise character evolves from hostility to a form of mutual respect over the course of the film. His performance was widely praised and introduced him to the widest possible American and international audience. Following The Last Samurai, Sanada appeared in a remarkable range of productions across different genres and national contexts. The science fiction film Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle, the Hollywood horror production The Ring 2, and Rush Hour 3 in 2007, where his role as Kenji gave him the rare opportunity to face off physically and dramatically with Jackie Chan. In the decades since Rush Hour 3, Sanada has continued to build one of the most distinguished international careers of any Japanese actor, appearing in major Hollywood productions including Avengers, Endgame, Mortal Kombat, and the television series Westworld. His starring role in the acclaimed FX series Shogun, released in 2024, earned him extraordinary critical acclaim and introduced him to a new generation of global viewers. Noémie Lenoir was born on September 19, 1979, in Les Lillis, a commune in the eastern suburbs of Paris, France. Her background was multicultural. Her father is French and her mother is of Malagasy and Réunionnese descent, giving Lenoir a mixed heritage that contributed to her distinctive and striking appearance. She grew up in the suburbs of Paris and was discovered as a model at a young age, beginning a career in fashion and modeling that would bring her to international prominence before her transition into acting. Lenoir became one of the most successful models of her generation, appearing on the covers of major international fashion magazines and working with some of the most prestigious fashion houses and brands in the world. She became particularly well known through her work with L'Oréal Paris, becoming one of their signature spokesmodels and appearing in their global advertising campaigns, a position that brought her face and name to a truly worldwide audience. Her visibility through the L'Oréal campaigns made her one of the most recognizable models working in Europe and one of the most prominent women of mixed-race background in international fashion during the early 2000s. Transition to acting. Lenore's transition from modeling to acting was a natural progression given her profile and ambitions. She appeared in French film and television productions before being cast in Rush Hour 3 in 2007. Which represented her most significant international acting role to that point. Her casting in the film as Genevieve, a central female character set in the Parisian world that Lenore herself was deeply embedded in through her modeling career, made both cultural and commercial sense. Her performance brought a genuine Parisian sensibility to the role and connected the film's use of Paris as a setting to an authentically French presence on screen. Following Rush Hour 3, Lenore continued to work in French film and television while maintaining her modeling career. She has been open in interviews about challenges in her personal life and has shown considerable resilience in navigating both the pressures of public life and private difficulties, emerging as a figure who is respected both for her professional accomplishments and for her honesty about her personal journey. Roman Polanski was born Raymond Thierry Liebling on August 18, 1933, in Paris, France, to Polish Jewish parents who had moved to France from Krakow. When he was 3 years old, the family returned to Krakow, Poland, a decision that would place them at the center of one of the most catastrophic events in human history. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the Polanski family, as Jewish residents of Krakow, were forced into the Krakow ghetto, one of the many enclosed areas established by the Nazi occupation authorities to segregate and control the Jewish population before the implementation of the extermination policies. Young Roman survived the Krakow ghetto by escaping through a gap in the fence, effectively fleeing into the broader Polish population at the age of around 8 years old. He survived the war years largely on his own or in the care of various Polish families, living under an assumed identity, moving between locations, and doing whatever was necessary to avoid detection in an occupied country where being Jewish meant facing almost certain death. His mother, Beulah, was killed at the Auschwitz concentration camp. His father survived the war by being imprisoned at Mauthausen concentration camp and was eventually liberated by Allied forces. The psychological and emotional weight of this childhood, the displacement, the terror, the loss of his mother, the years of hiding and uncertainty, shaped Polanski's sensibility as an artist in ways that run through his entire body of work. His films have consistently engaged with themes of vulnerability, persecution, paranoia, entrapment, and the fragility of safety, themes that are not intellectual abstractions for Polanski but rooted in lived experience of an extraordinarily extreme kind. Film career and major works after the war. Polanski reunited with his father in Krakow and eventually gained entry to the famous National Film School in Lodz, Poland, one of the most prestigious film schools in Europe and an institution that has produced a remarkable number of important Polish and international filmmakers. His early short films demonstrated a talent that was immediately recognized by his teachers and peers, and his first feature film, Knife in the Water, released in 1962, was an international sensation, nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film and establishing the young Polish director as one of the most exciting new voices in world cinema. Polanski moved to Western Europe and then to Hollywood, where he made a series of films that became defining works of their respective genres. Repulsion in 1965 was a landmark psychological horror film. Cul-de-sac in 1966 was a darkly comic thriller. Rosemary's Baby in 1968 was one of the most commercially successful and critically acclaimed horror films ever made in Hollywood, a film that combined supernatural terror with razor-sharp social satire, and that remains a landmark of American cinema. Chinatown in 1974, starring Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway, is widely considered one of the greatest films ever made, a neo-noir masterpiece that is studied in film schools around the world as a model of narrative construction, dialogue, performance, and direction. The Pianist in 2002, a film about the survival of a Polish-Jewish musician during the Nazi occupation of Warsaw, drew directly on the Holocaust experiences that Polanski himself had survived as a child. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival and earned Polanski the Academy Award for Best Director. His presence in Rush Hour 3 as Detective Revy was a cameo appearance that took on an additional layer of significance given that the film was shot in Paris, the city of Polanski's birth and a place to which he had been effectively confined for many years due to his legal situation in the United States. East meets West. The cultural collision at the heart of the franchise, the most foundational and persistent theme running through the entire Rush Hour franchise, and through Rush Hour 3 in particular, is the collision between Eastern and Western cultural identities. This is not merely a comedic device, it is the philosophical engine of the whole series, and Rush Hour 3 pushes it further by introducing a third cultural dimension in the form of France, creating a triangular tension between Asian identity, American identity, and European identity that generates both the film's comedy and many of its most interesting dramatic moments. The East. Lee as the embodiment of Asian values. Detective Inspector Lee represents a very specific set of values that the film associates with East Asian, and specifically Chinese, cultural identity. He is disciplined, measured, respectful of hierarchy and duty, deeply loyal to those he serves, and fundamentally uncomfortable with the kind of loud self-promotion and individual grandstanding that Carter represents. Lee does not need external validation. He does not perform his competence, he simply exercises it, quietly and without announcement. When he succeeds at something difficult, he does not celebrate. He moves on to the next task. These qualities are not presented as cold or robotic. They are framed as a form of dignity rooted in a particular cultural tradition. Lee's discipline is not the absence of feeling. It is the product of a cultural framework that values the suppression of individual ego in service of collective duty, that prizes restraint as a form of respect, and that understands competence as something that speaks for itself rather than requiring advertisement. This is a recognizable and broadly fair representation of certain values deeply embedded in Chinese and broader East Asian cultural traditions, even if the film necessarily simplifies and dramatizes them for comedic purposes. The character of Kenji adds a darker dimension to this cultural thread. Kenji is also the product of an Asian, specifically Chinese, cultural context, raised in the same orphanage as Lee and presumably exposed to the same foundational values. But Kenji's path represents the way in which those same values, loyalty, discipline, brotherhood, devotion to a collective, can be channeled through criminal organizations just as effectively as through law enforcement. The triads as an institution operate on their own version of loyalty, hierarchy, and collective identity. Kenji did not abandon Eastern values. He applied them in the service of a criminal empire. This complicates the film's cultural portrait of Asian identity in a way that gives it more depth than a simple celebration of Eastern virtues would allow. The West. Carter as the embodiment of American identity. James Carter, by contrast, is a character built almost entirely out of exaggerated but recognizable American cultural traits. He is loud, confident to the point of arrogance, individualistic, resistant to authority when that authority does not serve his purposes, and deeply invested in his own narrative, the story he tells about himself, the version of events in which he is always the central hero. Carter does not experience failure as information. He experiences it as a temporary inconvenience that he will overcome through force of personality. These qualities are presented with affection rather than contempt, which is important. The film is not making a critique of American cultural values through Carter, it is celebrating them in their most entertaining form while acknowledging their absurdity. Carter's confidence is both his most ridiculous quality and his most genuinely effective one. There are moments throughout Rush Hour 3 where his refusal to accept that he is out of his depth, culturally, linguistically, physically, produces results that a more cautious or self-aware person would never have achieved. His American certainty that things will work out, that he can handle whatever comes next, is played as both comedy and as a kind of admirable stubbornness. The Paris setting of Rush Hour 3 places Carter's American identity in particularly sharp relief. Paris is a city with a long, complicated, and often contentious relationship with American culture, a relationship defined by both admiration and resistance, by the simultaneous attraction to and rejection of American popular culture, American economic power, and American social attitudes. Dropping Carter into this environment forces his particular brand of American confidence to rub against one of the few cultural contexts in the world that is entirely unwilling to be impressed by it, and the friction this creates is one of the film's most consistently reliable sources of comedy. The third culture. France as mirror and foil. The addition of France as a cultural setting in Rush Hour 3 introduces a third strand into the East-West dynamic that the previous two films established. France, and Paris in particular, represents a form of Western cultural identity that is entirely distinct from the American version, older, more formal, more invested in its own traditions and aesthetic standards, and possessing a very specific and well-documented pride in French cultural achievement that can express itself as sophistication or as condescension depending on one's perspective. George the taxi driver is the film's representative of ordinary French identity, a man who is neither particularly cosmopolitan nor particularly provincial, who takes his city for granted the way people always take the places they live for granted, and who is completely unprepared for the cultural hurricane that arrives in his cab when Lee and Carter climb in. George's reactions to Carter in particular serve as a kind of cultural commentary, the genuine incomprehension of a French person encountering the full force of American confidence in its natural state, amplified to comic extremes. The film also uses Paris's architecture, history, and cultural landmarks. The Eiffel Tower, the Crazy Horse, the Grand Boulevards, as more than mere backdrop. These locations carry meaning. They signal that the events unfolding within them are happening in a place with its own history and its own cultural weight, and that weight occasionally pushes back against the American and Asian characters who have arrived to conduct their business within it. Theme 02 Brotherhood, Loyalty, and the bonds formed outside blood. One of the most emotionally substantial themes in Rush Hour 3 is the exploration of brotherhood. Not biological brotherhood, but the kind of bond that forms between people who are thrown together by circumstance, who share hardship, who choose each other across time and difficulty. The film explores this theme through two parallel relationships: the friendship between Lee and Carter, which runs across all three films in the franchise, and the foster brotherhood between Lee and Kenji, which forms the emotional core of this specific installment. Lee and Carter, a brotherhood built across difference. The friendship between Lee and Carter is, at its most fundamental level, a story about two people who should not work as a pair, who come from different cultures, operate according to different principles, communicate in different registers, and approach nearly every situation from completely different angles, and who have somehow, through the accumulation of shared experience and genuine mutual respect, become each other's most trusted partner. This kind of friendship has deep roots in cultural history and in storytelling traditions across multiple cultures. The idea of an unlikely brotherhood, of bonds formed not through similarity but through complementarity, not through ease but through difficulty, is one of the oldest and most resonant narrative patterns in human storytelling. It appears in classical literature, in folk tales, in religious texts, in military histories, and in the tradition of the buddy film that Rush Hour consciously inhabits. What gives the Lee and Carter friendship its particular cultural specificity is the racial and cultural dimension of their difference. These are not just two people with different personalities. They are a Chinese man and an African American man, two people from groups that have historically occupied very different positions within American society and that have had their own complex relationships with the dominant culture, with each other, and with the question of what it means to belong in America. The film does not dwell on this explicitly, but it is present in the texture of their interactions, in the way their different experiences of American society inflect the characters they have become. Lee and Kenji. Brotherhood broken by diverging paths. The relationship between Lee and Kenji introduces a far darker dimension to the theme of brotherhood. Here the film is asking a question that has enormous historical and cultural resonance. What happens to a bond formed in childhood and shared hardship when the people who share it grow up to stand on opposite sides of a fundamental moral divide? Can genuine brotherhood survive that divergence? Does the love between people who were once close enough to be brothers ever truly die? Or does it persist in some form underneath the choices and the loyalties and the years of separation? This is a question with deep roots in history and culture. It is the question at the heart of countless stories about civil war, about families divided by ideology, about communities torn apart by conflict, about the particular anguish of finding the person you love most on the other side of a battle line. It appears in literature from Shakespeare to Steinbeck, in historical accounts of every major civil conflict in human history, and in the personal testimonies of people who have experienced the rupture of close relationships by political or moral division. In Rush Hour 3, the orphanage background that Lee and Kenji share is culturally significant. Children who grow up in orphanages, particularly in the cultural context of China, often form bonds of unusual intensity and durability. Bonds that substitute for the family structures that conventional childhood provides. The brotherhood between Lee and Kenji was not formed by accident or convenience. It was formed by shared vulnerability, by the particular intimacy of children who have no one else, who must look to each other for the sense of belonging and safety that parents typically provide. That is an extraordinarily powerful foundation for a bond, and the film uses it to give the Lee-Kenji conflict genuine emotional weight that a more superficial treatment of the villain relationship would never achieve. Lee's refusal to give up on Kenji, his insistence throughout the film that his foster brother is reachable, that the person he once knew is still present somewhere inside the assassin Kenji has become, reflects a deeply human and culturally universal understanding of how love works. Love of this kind does not operate on a purely rational basis. It does not calculate the probability of redemption before deciding whether to continue caring. It simply continues, stubbornly and sometimes irrationally, because the alternative, accepting that the person you loved is truly gone, is unbearable. Theme 03: Organized crime, the triads, and the historical reality of criminal empires. The Rush Hour franchise has always used real criminal organizations as the backdrop for its stories, and the choice to center Rush Hour 3 around the triads, specifically around the attempt to expose the secret leadership of the Triad Network, connects the film to a long and genuinely significant history of organized crime in Asia and its global reach. The historical origins of the triads. The triads are not a fictional invention for the purposes of the Rush Hour films. They are real criminal organizations with a history stretching back centuries. The origins of the triads lie in the secret societies that emerged in China during the Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China, which ruled from 1644 to 1912 and which was founded by the Manchu people of northeastern China rather than by the Han Chinese, who comprised the vast majority of China's population. many of these secret societies began as resistance movements. Organizations dedicated to the overthrow of what their members considered illegitimate Manchu rule and the restoration of Han Chinese governance. They were patriotic organizations in their original conception, bound together by oaths of loyalty, ritual ceremonies, and a shared identity rooted in Chinese cultural and national pride. The name triad itself refers to the symbol of the triangle, which in these societies represented the unity of heaven, earth, and man, a cosmological framework drawn from Chinese philosophical tradition. Over the centuries, as the political conditions that gave rise to the secret societies changed and as the organizations expanded and evolved, they gradually transformed from political resistance movements into criminal enterprises. By the 20th century, particularly in Hong Kong and among overseas Chinese communities in Southeast Asia, the Americas, and Europe, triad organizations had become primarily criminal in nature, operating in drug trafficking, gambling, prostitution, extortion, loan sharking, and various other illegal enterprises while maintaining their internal structure of oaths, hierarchy, and ritual. The film's use of the triads as its central criminal organization is therefore historically grounded in a way that gives the story a layer of real-world significance beneath its action comedy surface. When Rush Hour 3 depicts the triads as an organization with tentacles reaching into European political and diplomatic circles, with a corrupt French official in their pocket, with the ability to operate across national boundaries and institutional structures, it is reflecting a genuine reality of how sophisticated transnational criminal organizations operate in the modern world. The Shyishin and the question of hidden power. The Shyishin, the secret list of triad leadership identities that drives the film's plot, is a fictional device, but it speaks to a very real phenomenon in the history of organized crime: the deliberate and systematic concealment of the identities of criminal leaders behind layers of organizational distance, front companies, and institutional corruption. One of the defining characteristics of the most sophisticated criminal organizations throughout history is their ability to create arrangements in which the actual decision-makers are completely insulated from the activities that generate their wealth and power. The people at the top do not handle drugs, do not commit violence, do not participate directly in any of the activities that make them criminally liable. They issue instructions through intermediaries, receive money through complex financial structures, and cultivate relationships with legitimate figures in business, government, and law enforcement that provide both protection and legitimacy. This structure has been documented in historical accounts of Italian-American organized crime, where the concept of the boss of bosses, the person at the absolute top of a criminal hierarchy who was often the last person to be identified by law enforcement, was a central feature of the organizational model. It has been documented in studies of Colombian and Mexican drug cartels, in analyses of Russian organized crime networks, and in investigations of Asian criminal organizations including the triads. The film's dramatic conceit of a list that would expose these hidden identities is therefore a compressed and dramatized version of something that criminal investigators and prosecutors have genuinely grappled with throughout the history of organized crime enforcement. Institutional corruption. Reynard as historical pattern. The character of Vardan Reynard, a senior French official who is secretly in the service of the triads, represents one of the most historically consistent and well-documented features of serious organized crime: the systematic corruption of legitimate institutional actors. Law enforcement officials, judges, politicians, diplomats, military officers, and business leaders have been documented throughout history as participants in criminal networks, providing the protection, information, and institutional access that criminal organizations need to survive and expand. This is not a cynical fictional invention. It is a historical pattern that appears in virtually every serious study of organized crime across every cultural and national context. The triads in Hong Kong, during the colonial period and after, cultivated relationships with police officers who could tip them off about raids, with customs officials who could look the other way at suspicious shipments, with politicians who could obstruct legislation that threatened their operations. The same pattern has been documented in Italian-American organized crimes relationships with local police, in Mexican cartel payments to government officials, in Russian oligarchs' relationships with political power. Reynard represents this historical truth in Rush Hour 3's compressed narrative form. His presence in the story says something important, that the most dangerous aspect of criminal power is not the violence it can deploy on the streets, but the influence it can purchase inside the institutions that are supposed to oppose it. An organization that can put its people inside law enforcement, inside diplomacy, inside the courts, becomes genuinely difficult to combat through conventional means, because the conventional means are contaminated. Theme 04 Race, Representation, and the buddy film tradition in American cinema. Rush Hour 3 exists within and contributes to a long tradition of interracial buddy films in American cinema. A genre that has its own history, its own cultural politics, and its own evolving relationship with the racial realities of American society. Understanding the Rush Hour films within this tradition reveals something important about what they are doing culturally, and why they have resonated so widely across racial and national boundaries. The history of the interracial buddy film. The interracial buddy film as a recognizable Hollywood genre emerged most prominently in the 1980s, though its roots go back further in American cinematic history. Films like 48 Hours in 1982, pairing Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, Lethal Weapon in 1987, pairing Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, and Beverly Hills Cop in the same period, established the template, an unlikely partnership between characters of different races, typically one white and one black, who must overcome their differences to accomplish a shared mission. In the process, discovering mutual respect and genuine friendship. This genre emerged at a specific moment in American cultural history. The post-civil rights era, when the legal structures of racial segregation had been dismantled, but when the social and psychological realities of racial division in American life remained profound and complicated. The interracial buddy film offered a fantasy of racial reconciliation and cross-cultural understanding that American society at large had not yet achieved, and it offered that fantasy in the most accessible possible form, through entertaining, commercially successful mainstream movies that asked nothing more of their audiences than enjoyment. The Rush Hour franchise introduced a new variation on this template by replacing the white-black pairing with an Asian-black pairing, a combination that was significantly less common in Hollywood history and that carried its own specific cultural implications. The relationship between Asian American and African American communities in the United States has its own complex history, distinct from the black-white dynamic that most interracial buddy films had explored, and the Rush Hour films navigated this complexity largely through comedy. Using the cultural differences between Lee and Carter as a source of laughter while simultaneously insisting that genuine friendship and mutual respect were possible across those differences. Asian representation in Hollywood. The significance of Jackie Chan. The cultural significance of Jackie Chan's presence in Rush Hour and its sequels cannot be understood without the context of Asian representation in Hollywood cinema. For much of Hollywood's history, Asian characters were either absent from mainstream American films or present in ways that were deeply problematic, as servants, villains, exotic decorations, or comic stereotypes. The complex and rich traditions of Asian culture, the diversity of Asian national identities and experiences, and the humanity of Asian individuals were consistently subordinated to the needs of narratives centered on white American protagonists. Jackie Chan's arrival as a genuine Hollywood leading man, not a supporting character, not a villain, not an exotic element in someone else's story, but an equal co-lead alongside one of the biggest African American comic stars of his generation, was therefore historically significant in ways that go beyond entertainment. He represented the possibility of an Asian protagonist in mainstream American cinema who was fully human, fully heroic, funny and capable and emotionally complex, and whose cultural background was treated as a source of richness rather than as an obstacle to be overcome or a curiosity to be examined. Rush Hour 3 in 2007 continued this representation at a time when the question of Asian visibility in Hollywood was still very much unresolved. The film's enormous global success, particularly in Asian markets where Jackie Chan was a figure of almost mythological cultural significance, demonstrated that mainstream American genre cinema could be genuinely internationally appealing when it incorporated non-white, non-Western perspectives as equal partners in the narrative rather than as peripheral figures. African American Identity and Chris Tucker's Carter Carter is one of the most culturally specific African American characters in mainstream Hollywood action comedy of his era. He is not a sanitized or generically American character with a surface-level racial identification. He is rooted in a very specific African American cultural tradition, one that draws on Black American vernacular speech, on the performance traditions of African American comedy, on the particular relationship with authority that characterizes much African American experience, and on the social dynamics of urban Black American life. His humor is not merely physical or situational. It is culturally embedded. The way he talks, the references he makes, the particular form of confidence and self-narration he employs, these are all recognizable expressions of African American cultural identity that Tucker brings from his own background and performance tradition. Carter is funny to audiences across cultural boundaries, but he is most fully intelligible to audiences familiar with the specific cultural context from which his character draws. This cultural specificity is part of what makes him a more interesting and more historically significant figure than a generic Hollywood action comedy sidekick would be. The film's Paris setting puts Carter's African American identity in an interesting additional context. Paris has a long and significant history as a place of refuge and recognition for African American artists and intellectuals, from the Harlem Renaissance figures who found greater acceptance in Paris than in their own country, to the jazz musicians who built careers in Europe during periods when racial discrimination in America severely limited their opportunities, to the writers and thinkers who chose Paris as a base because it offered a form of cultural freedom that American racial segregation denied them. This history is not explicitly engaged by the film, but it is part of the cultural landscape within which Carter's presence in Paris can be understood. Theme 05 Paris as cultural symbol, history, myth, and the weight of place. The decision to set Rush Hour 3 in Paris was not a purely logistical or aesthetic one. Paris carries an enormous weight of cultural and historical meaning. It is one of the most symbolically loaded cities on Earth, a place that functions simultaneously as a real city with real residents and real problems, and as a myth, an idea, a projection screen for the world's fantasies about beauty, romance, culture, art, and freedom. Paris as the capital of Western culture for centuries. Paris functioned as the self-proclaimed and widely acknowledged capital of Western culture, the city where art was made and judged, where fashion was invented and disseminated, where philosophy was conducted at the highest level, where architecture set standards that the rest of the world aspired to meet. The grands boulevards designed by Baron Haussmann in the 19th century, the museums that housed the greatest collections of art in the world, the cafes where existentialist philosophy was conducted over coffee, the fashion houses that dressed the most powerful and visible people in the world, All of these contributed to Paris's identity as a city of culture in the deepest and most serious sense of the word. Bringing Rush Hour 3 into this environment is a kind of cultural collision in itself. The Rush Hour franchise is, at its core, a piece of popular entertainment, energetic, commercial, designed for maximum audience enjoyment rather than for cultural prestige. Placing that franchise in the most culturally prestigious city in the Western world creates an interesting friction. Paris's cultural weight does not bend to accommodate the film. The film must operate within Paris, and that operation produces a comic tension that the movie exploits throughout its runtime. The Eiffel Tower as symbol and setting. The Eiffel Tower, as the setting for the film's climax, deserves particular attention as a cultural and historical symbol. When Gustave Eiffel's Iron Tower was first constructed as the entrance arch for the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, the centenary celebration of the French Revolution, it was controversial. Many Parisian intellectuals and artists of the period considered it an eyesore, an industrial intrusion into the refined architectural landscape of the city. Artists, writers, and cultural figures signed petitions against it. Guy de Maupassant reportedly ate lunch at the tower's restaurant regularly because it was the one place in Paris from which the tower itself was not visible. Over the course of the 20th century, the Eiffel Tower underwent one of the most complete transformations in the cultural biography of any human-made object. From despised industrial novelty to beloved national icon and one of the most visited landmarks in the world. It became, over time, not just a symbol of Paris and France but a symbol of human ambition, of engineering achievement, of the 19th century's faith in progress and industry, and through its association with romance and beauty, a symbol of love itself in the global popular imagination. Staging Rush Hour 3's final confrontation at the Eiffel Tower is therefore not simply choosing a recognizable location for a spectacular action sequence. It is placing the film's ultimate stakes, the confrontation between Lee and Kenji, the resolution of the Shyishin conspiracy, the test of friendship and brotherhood, at a location that carries enormous symbolic weight about human achievement, national identity, and the complicated relationship between industrial modernity and cultural beauty.